Teachers, are you struggling to manage difficult behaviors in your classroom this year? Are you really tired of hearing the same worn out classroom management tips that just aren't working for your kids? Well, you've come to the right place. This video is for you. I'm about to give you 10 classroom management techniques that are a little bit unconventional, but they really work. And number 10 is the best, so make sure to stick around to the very end. Welcome back to my channel. I am Charlotte, the trauma-informed teacher. This is a channel dedicated to helping teachers take better care of themselves so they can have more energy to pour into their students. Every week, I share self-care ideas, classroom teaching techniques, and lifestyle vlogs. I hope you will subscribe if you're not already subscribed and hit the notification bell so that you will not miss any of my videos. Let's get started. If you've been teaching for 5 years or more, you've most likely seen a major shift in student behavior. Kids are less focused, less disciplined, and less motivated to put in the work that they need to put in to actually learn. There are a lot of circumstances around that shift, and this video is not going to be about those today. Instead, I'm going to give you actual practical solutions that I hope you can try. Some of the things might seem like not really a big aha. However, we just need a good reminder once in a while. But other things, I hope you will say, hey, I didn't really think of that as a classroom management tip, but it makes sense. If you get just one new idea out of this video, then I've done my job. These ideas are coming from my own personal experience dealing with a difficult year. I started out with a larger than normal class this year for our district anyway. We typically have had between 12 to 15, 16 students in our classroom, but this year I had 28. On top of that, I have a very large number of students who have special needs, which is a wonderful thing for diversity in my classroom, but it also means that it's a lot of work when you have just one teacher doing all the subjects and trying to help the students with all of those things. In my case this year, it wasn't the individual students. They're all wonderful kids. It was the combination of students together with their needs, their energy level, lots of different factors, personality types, the mixture together just made for a really challenging class. We are now almost 3/4 of the way through the school year, and I can honestly say that although it's not perfect, it is so much better than when we started. My students have come a long way. Here are some of the theories that I rejected on classroom management and what I did instead. Number 1, I stopped expecting students to sit quietly and still in their seats, and I started adding more movement into my classroom routines. I have a lot of students that have attention issues this year, and they just really needed to learn through movement. Sometimes I feel like in education, we do know that working together and learning in different ways is helpful to students. But when we think about a classroom that is a classroom where the teacher is on top of classroom management, we think about the days when we used to sit in our own seats and we were quietly working and everything was pleasant and peaceful. That is not what our students actually need to be successful in today's world. Now, that's not to say that you can't have a quiet classroom and still have a classroom that's getting a lot of things done. I know a lot of teachers who actually do have this type of classroom and it's working for them. But I just knew it wasn't going to work for me, and it wasn't going to work for the group of students that I had this year. They needed to be able to socialize, to be able to learn. So I had to find a way to do that, but still put my own parameters around it so that they were doing it my way. There's nothing wrong with a quiet classroom, but classrooms where kids are moving around, talking, collaborating, working together are exciting places to learn and more exciting places for you to teach. I don't know about you, but I personally have more fun when I allow my students to work together, to move around the room, to be a little silly sometimes. I have people that come to sub in my room who don't understand why my students are allowed to be on the floor. I have people that don't understand why they're allowed to sit in different places around the room or be under the counter on a pillow. To me, if they're comfortable and they're on task, that doesn't bother me. However, I am sensitive to the fact that, that's not everyone's cup of tea. And so when I have a substitute, I tell my students, it's not going to be like it is when I'm here. So whatever that sub wants to do, if they don't want you to sit around the room, go ahead and just be respectful of that because they're company. So you have to, when you are allowing this type of freedom in your room, you have to also teach your students that, that's when you're in charge. When other people come in as guest teachers, we treat them as company and we go ahead and honor whatever their wishes are. In my classroom, students move with a purpose. They are noisy, but they have a noise level expectation that they can't go over. If they break that rule, then we just stop what we're doing. We reconvene as a group, we talk about it, and we go back to work at the right level. It works for me. My students get a lot done that way. Now, we do have periods of time throughout the day where they're silent reading or they're working on something on the computers and they have to concentrate on what they're doing, so I don't allow talking at that time. We have quiet moments. But overall, our classroom has kind of like an ebb and a flow where there are times of the day when it's going to be really noisy and busy, and there are going to be other times where, we're more focused individually. Number 2, I stopped focusing on the negative behaviors and started rewarding my students with little surprises when they were doing positive things. The old saying is true, whatever you water grows. So if you spend a lot of time correcting the negative without reinforcing the positive, then the negative is what's going to become more and more prevalent. A lot of times students do things for attention, and if they get attention by doing the negative thing, what do you think they're going to keep doing? Good behavior that's rewarded by the teacher is contagious in your classroom. Try it and see if it helps in your class. Number 3, I stopped trying to solve all of the problems in my classroom by myself and started putting it back in the hands of the students. Of course, I had to guide my students in coming up with solutions, but when we met together as a class, talked about the problems we were having and what type of effect this was having on their learning, and then went back to why are we here? How can we make sure that, that those goals are maintained in our classroom? And I let the students come up with a solution. Often I only needed to tweak it a little bit, and the solution that they come up with, they're much more likely to follow. Also, I found out that they will police their own solution, but they're not going to necessarily police mine. This saved me a lot of repeating myself because the students were taking care of getting everyone else in line on their own. Technique number 4. I stopped trying to do so much direct instruction. And I know that some of your school systems expect you to be like the sage on the stage teacher, and many of the curriculums need you to do that. However, there are ways that you can take a curriculum that is focused on direct instruction and still make that happen in more of a blended learning setting. That's what I did. Our reading curriculum is very much like that. We have a large portion of our lesson that is teacher-led direct instruction. What I did in that case was I took the introductory material and found like a really important 20-minute segment that I could deliver to my whole group. Then I split my students up into rotating stations. My students have learned how we do stations. They love station work. And the most important skill that my students need to show me at the end of the lesson, that is the application part of the lesson. That's the one that I make my teacher station. So I'm always meeting with students and monitoring to make sure that they got the skill that they were supposed to get for that lesson, while also just assigning some of that more independent or even, small group partner work in a station fashion. This has saved my voice so much in the classroom because there is really no way to effectively give a direct instruction lesson to 26, 28 students and keep everyone on task all of the time. It is really hard. So when I pull them in smaller groups, it is much easier for me to make sure that they're engaged. If I find that students are not doing what they're supposed to at the stations, then it's just another situation where we stop what we're doing. I talk to the class, we come up with some solutions, and we move on. At the beginning of this process, you're going to have some bumpy times, and you're going to have to spend more time stopping and starting your lesson. However, once students get used to this and they're following the routine, it's going to go beautifully. Try blended learning. There's lots of models. I'll link some information below for you to check out. Jennifer Gonzalez has some great information on it. There's a couple of other really good authors that talk about blended learning. how to make it work for different situations. So try it and see if you like it. And let me know in the comments if you do try anything, and let me know if it worked or not. I'd love to hear your ideas. Number 5, I stopped addressing the whole class when it wasn't at least 80% of the students doing something. If I stop to give a lecture to my class, it's because there is a very large majority of students doing something wrong. If it's not close to 80% of the class, then I'm not going to bother doing that, because it's not fair to the 30 to 40% of the students who are not doing that thing. Instead, I try as much as I can to go up to a student and quietly talk to them in their ear, or pull them off to the side where they don't have an audience and they aren't heard by the other kids, where I can talk to them about what's going on, kind of question them, like, you know, why are they doing what they're doing? What do they think they're supposed to be doing right now? Sometimes I might need to step into the hallway, but of course that's a tricky one, because you have to make sure you're still monitoring your class when you do that. But in any way that you can, try to make your correction like quieter and more individual. It's going to keep you from embarrassing students, for one, and your students who tend to be those attention drawers. If you embarrass them in front of their peers, it can cause you more problems with their behavior down the road, because then you've broken their trust and they don't want to behave for you. Number 6, if it is an issue where it's the majority of the class, or if I have a student that just keeps stopping and starting the lesson, stopping and starting because of their behavior, then it's obvious to the whole class what they're doing. So at that point, you probably will have to stop and talk to that student in front of the class. What I do then is I usually try to engage with my parents. So I do not mind stopping a lesson. If I'm already stopping and starting anyway, because I can't keep moving through the lesson due to the behavior being so like unruly, then it's not going to hurt anymore for me to stop the lesson long enough to contact the parent.
Hello?
I'm usually very brief about what the child did. When I call a parent in front of the class, I will just say something to the effect of, you know, Johnny is disrupting the lesson. I'm going to let him talk to you and explain what happened. And so then I get the parent involved in talking to the student, and that sort of takes the pressure off of me as the one correcting the student, and that way the whole class isn't listening to the correction because it's happening on the other end of the phone, but yet it's still getting through to that student that needs to hear it. Once I do something like this, usually I don't have any more problem with that student the rest of the day. However, if you still continue to have a problem, that's when that student probably needs to just go for a timeout to another class with a trusted teacher that you have worked out in advance. Always have your teacher that you can, you know, take kids for them and they take kids for you. It really helps a lot. And of course, send something valuable for the student to work on that they know how to do independently. I try to have some things ready in advance in case anything happens like that. I don't get those things ready every single week. I just sort of do them ahead of time and have some extra things on the side whenever I get my new units together, so that if something happens, I can always pull something for the student to do. It's not something that happens the majority of my time in my room, but it is a good option to have on the table in case you need a different approach one day for a student who's just having a really hard time following expectations. Number 7, and I know this is going to be a controversial one, my classroom economy, or my classroom points / money reward system, it works. I know that there is a lot of talk about how you shouldn't pay a student for doing the right thing in your class, and that it's actually not motivating in the long run. However, I think that when students are learning a specific thing that seems to be difficult for them, that it's newer as far as you correcting that behavior, that's a time when paying them for doing the right thing with your classroom points. In my case, I use Dojo points, and I use something I call Starbucks, and they're interchangeable. And then we just shop with our points once a quarter. So students are motivated because they know they're going to get to shop with those points later. And if they're losing points because of behavior, then they're also motivated because they realize they could be gaining points, and that's like taking money out of the piggy bank. So you can say what you want about how classroom rewards and classroom currency doesn't work. However, in my experience, if it's not overused, and it's used for something that's a skill that you're focusing on, teaching the students at that time to do better, then it works. Once students have done that and they've mastered it, then I wouldn't continue to pay them for that kind of thing. I would just expect it as part of your regular classroom routine and your culture in your classroom. And then I would address it, in other ways. But when you're having a problem and you're trying to train students to do the right thing, it's a nice little extra to be able to give them a reward for exhibiting the behavior that you're trying to encourage. I have a whole other video about how I run my classroom economy, and I will place it up in the cards. So if you haven't already watched it, you can go watch that next. But it's a really good video about how I use Class Dojo and Starbucks in my classroom to motivate my students. Number 8. I stopped waiting for administrators to give consequences, and I started finding some consequences of my own that would deter students when my regular classroom routines and procedures were not working. So what do I mean by this? My everyday classroom procedure and routine involves redirecting students. It involves restating the behavior expectation in the class. It involves pulling the student aside if necessary, if it continues, talking to them, calling a parent. However, when these things are not working and I'm seeing some repeated behaviors, that's when this procedure comes in handy. I try things such as making students walk during their recess time before they can play. Walking laps, it's something that a lot of our teachers are doing. And so I will assign laps as part of their recess. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Recess is something that kids value. So when you make them walk instead of being able to play with their friends for a few minutes, then it's something they remember. And remembering is the first step to changing their behavior. If that doesn't work, another thing that I try is silent lunch, where they are separated from other students. Sometimes they are all by themselves. Sometimes I have a whole table of silent lunch kids. It just depends on the day. I haven't had to use a lot of silent lunch this year, but I use it strategically, and it is something that can deter behavior because they don't like it. It's their time to socialize. When I give them silent lunch, I usually let them play the entire recess, no laps. I'm not going to punch them twice for something. They've already sat there and been quiet throughout the lunch. I let them play with their friends. They need to socialize too. So, I try to be fair about it. If they have laps, I don't give them silent lunch, vice versa. I do want to make sure that my students get exercise, they get fresh air, and they get to socialize with their peers during those more leisurely break times. But taking away talking during lunch is something you can do when other things aren't working. For students that these things aren't working, bouncing to another classroom's not working, they're still doing the same things. I found that because we have a small school, our administrators aren't always available to deliver consequences quickly enough for the consequence to really mean something to the student. That is just the reality of working in a rural district, because you usually have less money because there's fewer kids, and when you have less money, you have less positions. So our administrators are really doing a lot of different roles, and it's not their fault that they can't always be there. So if I feel like the particular situation is warranting something a little bit more, but my administrator is not available to do it, then I don't have a problem keeping a student after school, especially if it's something like they aren't doing their work because they're fooling around instead, and it's been going on for a period of time. That is when I might say, okay, if you want to play right now, then after school today, you can stay with me at 3 o'clock and we will do what you didn't do. This is a very logical consequence. If you don't do your work during the school day, you're going to have to stay later and do it. Of course, I need to contact the parent. Of course, I need to make sure that that's going to be something that there's going to be somebody to pick up the kid. All the logistics need to be taken care of. If it doesn't work for them that day, I try my best to schedule it the very next day. And if that's not going to happen, then I will go ahead and just allow my administrator to handle it, because at that point, it's not going to take any more time for them to deliver the consequence than it would for me to. So it wouldn't make that much difference in that case. But I have found that used sparingly, this technique is extremely effective with my kids. So taking back the power and doing something that might be like a consequence that the kids have not felt that consequence very often in other classrooms and other settings in the building. It's something they don't expect to happen to them. It's kind of a shocker when they have to stay after school, make up work. It's going to be something they remember. But the other wonderful thing about that is that while you have the kid after school, if you're really nice to them and you just talk calmly with them and reasonably with them, you can actually build the relationship during that time, even though they're madder than a hornet because they had to stay after and do the thing that they didn't want to do. So it works. It's rarely needed, but it's just another layer of consequences that you can use if simpler steps are not already working. Number 9, I stopped comparing myself to other teachers. Instead of trying to look at everybody else's classroom and see if I'm measuring up to them, I learned that if I just start looking at the growth that my students are making with me in my classroom, that's a much better gauge of how I'm doing than whether my classroom is performing up to the level of anybody else in my building. My classroom is not going to be like the other classes. It's not like the class next door. It's not like the class down the hall. It's not like the class across from me. One of the beautiful things about teaching is that we are all individuals and each one of us has a different strength and different way of communicating information to students. We have our own styles. We have our own personalities. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay for my classroom to be a reflection of me as an individual. There are a lot of ways to be a great teacher. Be the type of teacher that works for you. And last but not least, number 10, I stopped listening to the voices of critics in my building, in the community, and I just started appreciating the unique dynamics of my own classroom. This is sort of like number 9, but it's a little bit broader. The culture that I develop in my room is up to me. I'm the only one who has to deal with it day in and day out. It's okay if I do something that seems unconventional to other people, because if it's working for me and it's working for my students and they're learning that way, no one's getting hurt. It's okay. I just decided that I was going to let other people think what they wanted to think, say what they wanted to say, and I was just going to keep on doing my absolute best for the kids. That is all that anyone can expect out of you, is your best. So stop comparing yourself to people and just enjoy the unique classroom that you have designed. You've got this. I hope you've enjoyed these 10 kind of unconventional ways to think about classroom management. Tell me what your favorite was in the comments below. Until next time, don't forget to work hard, be kind, and amazing things will happen. Have a great day. Bye-bye.